Waterloo. Welcome to Cocktails in Mr. Waverly's office. I'm Arthur.
I'm Hannah.
And I'm Logan. So, today we're going to be talking about the Shark Affair and how Roddenberry's ideas for Star Trek relate and don't relate in some ways to The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Should we start out with talking about the Shark Affair?
Yeah. Although I think actually talking about the Shark Affair immediately, we can start getting into some Star Trek nonsense too, because one of the opening shots in Shark Affair is of James Doohan. Star Trek nonsense too, because one of the opening shots in Shark Affair is of James Doohan.
Yeah.
I actually... Okay, I'll confess, I completely forgot that James Doohan was in this, so I didn't even notice him.
His name is, Mr. Maninray. Two people say it, and they say it really differently, so I was not sure what his name was actually supposed to be. But he's definitely not just Ocean Scotty.
Ocean Scotty.
This is the name of the episode.
Ocean Scotty.
Yeah, Ocean Scotty.
I like to be sea in Ocean Scotty's garden.
We'll get on a boat.
Doesn't Michael Jackson's family own the rights to the Beatles songs? Don't claim this. I think that falls under parodies.
Yeah,
I think we're fine.
Fair use.
Yeah, fair use. This is fair use.
We should probably describe the plot of the Shark Affair.
Okay. So basically, there's this guy named Mr. Shark who has
Captain
this
Shark.
cult. Has this cult thing on a ship where apparently he's convinced that the world, the people are gonna blow up the world and the only people on his ship are gonna survive it. So he basically kidnaps a bunch of people that can do random things like a butcher, a pianist, etc., a librarian, to go on his ship so that he can have this perfect utopian society after the rest of the world has been destroyed. So this results in him, first, he puts out these classified ads around the world for people to come do things, and then he kidnaps them and sticks them on his ship. So this resulted in him kidnapping a librarian, Mr. Barnman, not Barnman. So through this classified ad, he kidnaps Mr. Barnman, and then his wife is strangely is strangely casual about his I just misgendered his wife. Wow. about his wife is strangely fine with her husband being gone, after Napoleon asks her if her wife ever came back, she just says nope, and then I've got a piece of pound cake. So that shows how concerned she is.
Yeah, she's weirdly cavalier about it. She's like, nah, he couldn't be cheating on me. I would have had to write the classified ad for him if he ever wanted to go pick up women or something like that. She's totally unconcerned.
Yeah. She was kind of funny in that way, and also her love of her little bird. She had a little parrot.
Yeah, there's a really cute line later in the episode where she's saving the bird, and she said, "I had to get Sam," and Napoleon says, "Well, now that you have the Sam, go do blah blah blah." And it's that's a name, Napoleon. Did you forget how to speak English?
And so at the end of the episode, actually, because Napoleon and Ilya somehow because Mrs. Barnman tries to find her husband, because she gets this ticket from this this shady guy in a white suit, and for some reason she just, instead of being like, what the hell is this guy doing, like she just is like, oh yeah, tickets, I can go on a boat, it's so cool. And I don't really get that, but whatever, you do you, Mrs. Barnum. And
I feel like the best part of that is that this happens after she has already talked to Napoleon and Ilya about her husband's disappearance.
Yeah.
So, like, she's already been told that there's probably a conspiracy, and then a stranger comes to her door and's like, come on my boat. And she's like, wee, boat!
Yeah! I'm just like, what? So Napoleon and Ilya try to get on the boat that she is on to try to rescue her, but then they basically go on like this life raft in the middle of the ocean and hope that they get picked up. and then they end up on the boat with Mr. Shark, the pirate guy that's trying to just trying to survive Doomsday. They accidentally get rescued by them instead of the ship that she is on, but she just ends up on Mr. Shark's ship too anyways. So then eventually Napoleon kind of he basically like puts a bomb in the ship by the engine so that like the people but there's enough lifeboats for everyone, so it's all fine and they survive, except for Mr. Shark, who decides to die with the ship,
as any good captain will.
Yeah.
So it's our description makes it maybe seem a little zanier than it actually is. I think that in a weird way, like, this episode is philosophically and ideologically very interesting. There's a bunch of stuff that happens in terms of like talking about sharks. He describes his boat as like a floating Garden of Eden, and his whole idea of like survivalism and like trying to move himself out of society. Like near the end of the episode, they get into that stuff in a really interesting way, and I think that ties into both what we're talking about later in terms of connections between Mongol and Star Trek, but also I feel like the last line that Shark says is really interesting in terms of the very last lines of the series. But I'll get there later.
Oh, interesting. So it really isn't as alien as it might sound, because it's like Captain Nemo meets Noah.
Yeah.
So
Also, I remember
no, go on.
Okay, so I remember Mr. Barnum at the very end talking about how he actually kind of liked that utopian life where he just got to just do his librarian stuff and just felt like he was doing it for a greater good, and didn't mind being on the ship, which contrasted with the perspective of Napoleon and Mrs. Barnum. So I found that interesting too.
Yeah.
Because it is escapism. I mean, escapism, I would say, because they get to live on this boat where everybody is needed and everybody has their own functions, but at the same time, they don't really participate in the society, and they don't have everyday problems because everything is provided for them. It's basically it was the point of Mrs. Barnum, because she was like, of course you like this life, but wouldn't you just go and live in the real world? I really like her character.
Yeah. She has a line where at the party she says something like, you're all just running away from your problems.
Yeah.
And points out that, it seems like they're doing something noble. It seems like they're doing something that's hard, separating themselves from society. But she's saying, no, separating yourself from society actually, in some ways, is very easy. Saying, I don't want to participate, I don't want to have to do the things that make me part of a society, is kind of the coward's way out.
Yeah, and it's still a very important idea, I would say, because even now there are many people who don't want to participate in the society, but the only way to make the society better is to participate in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
I really appreciated that Ms. Barnman was like, time to rip survivalists a new one.
I mean, there's one thing about being prepared just in case like an emergency happens, and it's another thing creating your whole ship to survive the apocalypse that probably won't happen.
Yeah.
Also, can I speak just briefly about the fact that the captain of this boat is Captain Shark? I know that Man from U.N.C.L.E. tends to be really on the nose with people's names, but Captain Shark? Like, he might as well have been Captain Boat.
Well, that's not his actual name, as we learned at the end of the episode, but still. Like, he chose that name for himself.
He's
like, we learned at the end of the episode that he has an actual name. I completely forgot it, but...
Same.
But he just decided that I am going to be a captain. What's the most captain-y name? Mr. Shark.
What are some of the things that any of us have noticed, either in terms of like character development, like how they're using Napoleon and Ilya, or like specific moments in the episode that we thought were particularly stand out?
Well, for me, the biggest thing is that we see the beginning of the real OTP, and it's Ilya/Ford. Ilya/Ford. He eats a lot in this episode.
Yeah, there's like endless Ilya eating in this episode.
Yeah.
He
Oh, I know.
He's given like a bowl of soup at the beginning of the episode by Ms. Barnman, who offers both Ilya and Napoleon food, and Napoleon's like, I'll have a cup of coffee, and Ilya's like, soup please. And then before they leave, Napoleon is like, why don't you stay and have more soup?
Oh, yeah, I actually I have the exact quote written down. I think you could use another plate of soup.
I think Ilya, like, picks up a sandwich off Napoleon's desk later on and eats it.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, I feel like he eats something at one of the like, shark parties.
Yes, he does.
So he's just kind of, like, putting things in his mouth the whole episode.
That doesn't sound good!
Like a little bunny rabbit. Like, he's nibbling on things.
Yeah, he's a little rabbit. Okay, he's a little rabbit. He's a little bunny rabbit. Okay, because he actually was pretty cute. Like, there was a point where he was really cute when he was talking about the Russian pianist, and like when he talked about how he plays Bach with impeccable style, yes. He moved his hand a little bit, and it was so cute, because like we often think of like Ilya as being like the stereotypical Ilya is all stoic and emotionless, but he had so much emotion there. He just was all like, he plays Bach with impeccable style, and he moved his hands and stuff, and I'm just like, oh.
Yeah, there's a bunch of really cute Ilya moments in this episode. Like, you see kind of how he is when he's with people he's comfortable with. And it's very cute.
Yeah.
Also, the same scene where he talks about the Russian pianist, also Waverly is just like, Russians and their stupid names. Right to Ilya! It's like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah. Also, what I noticed in that scene is that as soon as Waverly mentioned the Russian pianist, like, Ilya perked up a little bit, and Napoleon just looked at him, and I'm just like, oh, they had this planned out. They probably.
we should probably mention that the scene in question is also the namer for this podcast. So, in this scene, what happens is we see Napoleon and Ilya, they're in Waverly's office, and Ilya is sitting in, like, one of the easy chairs in Waverly's office, and Napoleon comes over and sits on the side table, like, right in Ilya's business, and offers him a cocktail, and they're talking, and they have this cute little banter about, like, well, why does someone need aspirin and shoelaces in the middle of the ocean? And it's very cute and kind of cozy. And then Waverly comes in and they both like jump up from where they're sitting and like start buttoning their coats. It's like nothing untoward was going on. Why are you acting like it was? And then they go over and they start talking to Waverly about the case, and that's when he's just like, Russians. You know Russians, right, Ilya? So weird.
Well, to be fair, the pianist name was really difficult to pronounce.
I actually have it written down, but I didn't like write down how it was pronounced, so I'm kind of lost.
I think it was something like Vasily Chekhudakevich. I don't even know because I'm pretty sure it's a made-up name.
Chokudaknevich.
It's just like very obscure.
It's Chokudaknevich.
Yeah. Russians in their names.
Well, to be fair, my last name was not anglicized, is pretty much unpronounceable to people who aren't accustomed to the language. So you know what? That's just how it be sometimes.
My last name is literally a noun, and sometimes people still are like, it's a word, like an English word.
Oh my god.
I noticed that this episode has a bunch of Ilya physical comedy, which is really not a thing in later episodes. So there's a running gag where Ms. Barnman hits Ilya with a door. This happens twice during, like, a chase sequence at the beginning of the episode, where Ilya is, like, trying to get through the apartment building, chasing down one of, I think, Shark's men, and he gets hit by a door twice during that sequence, and then later in the episode, when they're on the boat, and Ms. Barnman has been put on the boat as well, he thinks someone is coming into their cabin to hurt them or something, and so he sneaks up to the door, and he waits behind it, and the door swings open and smashes him in the face, and he falls again, and he's like, Mrs. Barnman must be here. And it's really interesting to me because, like, I don't really think there was a lot in the way of, like, Ilya pratfalls later on. Just torture.
Well, speaking of torture, there was Napoleon torture in this episode. Yep. Yeah, it was. In that scene, I just was like, oh, okay, he's shirtless and everything. Okay, I see where we're going now.
Yeah. So Captain Shark, upon discovering that Napoleon and Ilya are agents, whips Napoleon, and it's weirdly gratuitous.
It is!
There's also a whole thing where, like, Ilya throws himself in the way of the whip at the beginning of it, and is like, no! And it's like, that's not gonna stop them. That's just gonna make it so that you get hurt too. But yeah, there's the other Napoleon torture that happens in this episode is actually Robert Vaughn torture, which is to say they put him in the ocean again.
Yeah.
When they're on the little raft, it's really funny because Napoleon says something like, sometimes I think Waverly is in the pay of Thrush. And it's like knowing that Robert Vaughn is afraid of water makes that feel so much meaner. Like, no, the writers are just in the pay of Thrush. And then Ilya has this line where he says something about the ocean being too big, too wet, and too salty.
Oh yeah, he goes, He goes, I wrote down this quote too. I hate the sea. It's too big, too wet, too salty.
It's like, that's the perfect descriptor for fandom, isn't it? David McCallum had no idea that he was prophesying his future.
Yeah.
This is a very fun episode because you can also make jokes about going down with a ship.
Oh, you're right, because this is kind of the first. This is the first episode I would describe as being like kind of slashy. Like the previous 3 episodes they're not. Like there's if you really wanted to read in like the very small bits of time that Napoleon and Ilya got on screen together, you could, but this episode really kind of focuses their relationship in a way that the previous episodes haven't.
Yeah. I mean, in the quad du Partit affair, there are like 2 moments that are kind of shippy. The one when Napoleon says, you will get used to him, he might even go on you. And, yeah,
well, and the whole fear toxin scene.
Yeah, and then of course the fear toxin as well. And in this episode, they spend most of it together, and they share many moments.
Yeah. Talking about going down with the ship, a character who I wish we got a little more information about in this episode, it was Mr. Morgan.
Yeah.
So I think he's the first mate on the ship.
Yeah.
He's a very tall man, and he's very quiet, and we get very little information on him, and it's really interesting because he only has like real lines near the very end where Shark is basically saying he's going to go down with the ship, and Mr. Morgan is like, well then I too will die with the ship, and we get this sense that he's like deeply dedicated to Shark, and Shark kind of responds in a way that indicates that he is also deeply dedicated to Mr. Morgan and therefore wants him to leave, but we have no real information on him other than that. It's interesting.
I ship it.
Shark Morgan forever.
Someone could totally expand those characters and write that.
I'm trying to see, what else did I write down?
And in the rest of
I noticed one of the...
Go on.
Eartha, you go.
I mean, in this episode, they really just stand next to each other and don't really talk. I mean,
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of that.
In the rest of the episode, Shark and Morgan just stand next to each other and don't really talk.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's really weird. Like, we have no real interaction with them until the last, 3 minutes of the episode, and then it's like, you're the finest man I've ever worked with. You need to get off this ship. And it's like, okay. I had no prior indication that they liked each other at all.
Shout out to this episode for Napoleon in a beanie. I quite liked that.
So cute.
Yeah, when he's on the raft.
Yeah. I really like both of them in their, we are sailors outfits, because they are 100% YMCA village people sailor outfits. They're like, what does a sailor wear? Denim and a beanie, right?
Also, something I've noticed about Man from U.N.C.L.E. fandom, being someone who's read a lot of Man from U.N.C.L.E. fan fiction, is that in fan fiction, Ilya is stereotypically shown as being obsessed with explosives.
That's
I've seen
really
that a lot.
Weird.
And I so far I have not really seen that in canon at all.
Yeah, no. That's really weird.
Is that just a fanon thing? Because literally, when I was seeing Napoleon doing the explosive stuff, I was like, this is the kind of thing Ilya would do in a fan fiction.
I don't know. That's really mysterious.
Because, like, literally, I've read fan fiction where, like, Ilya is, like, amazing at making these explosive gadgets and stuff, and I'm like, what?
Huh.
My guess is that people think that Ilya is obsessed with destruction.
It's so interesting because, like, Ilya does occasionally, like, very, very coldly, like, kill people in the series, but it's always in a this is my job and I'm doing my job kind of way. Like, it's not really... He doesn't revel in it.
Maybe there are some moments in, like, season 3, but I can't really think about anything. So it is a weird headcanon.
Yeah, I don't know, because, like, I literally, when I was reading fanfiction, I fully expected Ilya to be making all these cool gadgets and explosives and stuff, and I'm nah.
Oh, you know what? Wait, I think I do know what that actually could be from. So, there's a scene in one episode, that it's like the end of an episode where they've been talking to a teacher, and Napoleon and Ilya are both, like, sitting on, like, kindergarten furniture, and Ilya just takes apart a doll, and it's, like, not an important part of the scene. He's just, like, fiddling with this doll. But when I was looking this up and reading about it, I found out that apparently David McCallum was, like, known for just taking apart props.
Yeah.
To the point where the, like, props people who worked on the show would, like, make sure someone was watching him if there was too much downtime, because he'd, like, show up in the props closet and just be like, oops, I took the whole gun apart. So I guess he was kind of a tinkerer.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where that comes from, is it's actually a David McCallum trait rather than an Ilya trait.
Sounds very likely, yeah.
David McCallum just needs a fidget cube. Oh my god.
I like that.
If I can time travel, I'm not gonna do anything amazing with it. I'm just gonna take a fidget cube from nowadays and travel back in time to the 60s, then give it to David McCallum and come back.
What would the butterfly effect for that be? I cannot even imagine.
Okay.
What if it made...
They're also...
Okay, go on.
There's a part where, like, this is the first bit of, like, bodily contact between Napoleon and Ilya. Napoleon just rested his hand on Ilya's back for a little bit, and I just was like, oh.
You know, it kind of sounds like we're really begging for scraps here, but no, it's in the early episodes, there's not that much. It becomes so very much more later on.
I know, but this is like the first touch.
They also seem to share an office in this episode, which is really interesting because I don't think we ever really see their office again.
No, I don't think so.
But there's a scene where Napoleon is, like, sitting at a desk and he has his feet up and he's complaining about, like, not being able to make any headway on the mystery, and Ilya's like, me either, neither of us can make headway on the mystery, and then he, like, just reaches over Napoleon's legs and, like, eats his sandwich.
As you do.
Very casual, yeah.
Yeah, you definitely get the idea at this point that they're, like, friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
so,
something more.
In addition, like, Ilya saw the Russian pianist at Carnegie Hall 2 years ago. That's what he says. Mm-hmm. So we can imply from that Ilya was in New York 2 years ago. Whether he was visiting or lived there, we don't know.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'm always kind of baffled by people who make Ilya significantly younger than Napoleon in fanfic, because it's like, it's hard enough to squeeze in all of the things Ilya has supposedly done into someone who's like 31. Trying to do that with someone who's like 23 is like literally impossible.
I know, that's like anime protagonist levels.
Ilya, I'm 15 and I own this corporation, Kuryakin.
Okay, if there's like any people involved in the anime industry out there, I totally am down for a man from Uncle Anime, just letting you know.
Yeah.
And it has enough of a historical cult following there. Like, even there was an official manga and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a market for it, I think.
Yeah, or, maybe among Japanese grandmas.
Yep.
All the Obasans. Yep. When we were talking about taking things apart and gadgets and explosives and things, I was also noticing in this episode, when they're talking to Ms. Barnman, they pull out their communicators and they're talking on them, and she asks a couple questions about them, and they're really evasive. And she asks, like, how expensive are they? And he was like, oh, not very, and then he leaves. And it's really interesting because I feel like in the earlier episodes, they try a little harder to disguise the spy tools. And then, like, later on, it's just like, oh, excuse me, gotta pull out my spy phone, give me a second.
Yeah. I know, like they actually made, after the show, like, people were rightly confused by them because they hadn't seen them out and about. But later episode was just like, oh, here's Napoleon Solo in the Thresh headquarters with the spy phone.
As one does.
How is I know they don't take it away for plot reasons, but how logically, why don't the Thrush people take away the communicators when they keep people captive?
Maybe
they never do.
Maybe Napoleon and Ilya each carry 6 of them on their person.
Oh yeah.
And Thrush always manages to find 5 of them, but not the 6th.
Ilya had one in his shop. Remember?
There is an episode where Ilya has an extra communicator in his sock, so yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Maybe they put one in their tie, they put another one in their sleeve.
Okay, you could totally have a secret compartment inside the tie where you could put a pen communicator or something. I see that.
An underwear pocket.
Yeah, I was thinking, oh man, April Dancer is an advantage here. She could she has the glue compartment.
Oh Jesus Christ! I did not think that's where you were going.
No! Oh no! No! I'm sorry, that's not where I went.
I had water in my mouth when you said that, and I almost spat it on my computer.
No, I'm at the poop compartment.
Cursed!
Okay.
How do we move on from this?
We don't. Remember there was that episode in season 2 where Ilya had some kind of a secret transmission on his person, and Thrush agent literally undressed him down to his underwear, and they were able to find.
I feel like every time I have an unfortunate or cursed thought about this series, it turns out that thought has been directly addressed in canon.
Yeah.
Oh boy. What was I going to say? No, I completely lost my train of thought. We'll cut that out.
I will talk.
Okay.
So I think it's interesting that it was Napoleon who came up with the explosion plot. Because I think it's basically there because at that point, the show was still focused on Napoleon, and so he was the one who was supposed to come up with all the good ideas. Maybe that's why he was the one who came up with this outrageous plan to blow up the boat. But at the same time, it's also important because it shows that he can think in unusual ways, I would say, and it shows why he's a good agent.
Yeah. It's interesting rewatching this episode after having recently watched the last couple episodes of the series. I feel like there legitimately is kind of like a character trajectory for Napoleon that is like, frankly, kind of depressing. Where in this episode, like, it ends with he and Shark not really being able to see eye to eye, and Napoleon trying to argue that, like, it's important to participate in society and that, like, it's better to change things rather than try to escape from them. And Shark says something to him like, only optimists like yourself can go on living in this world. And then the, like, last lines of the last episode are Napoleon remembering the bad guy from that episode saying, Mr. Solo, you and I have fought the seemingly endless battle against evil. Don't you see this way, my way, the battle ends once and for all in favor of good? And it's like, oh no! Like, the idea that Napoleon has gone from, in season 1, being someone who, like, the bad guys see as an eternal optimist who will, like, always be fighting, to the end of season 4 where, like, he's been essentially, like, worn down by all the things that have happened and is, like, potentially starting to see that, like, everything he's doing is not making as much of a difference as he would hope it would. And it's like, if there was a second half of the 4th season, would it be about Napoleon and Ilya quitting?
I mean, I actually don't think that they would quit, but at the same time, there is no real direction in which it could go, because season 4 was very sad and depressing on its own. And if we got as many more episodes of it, I mean, it could only get worse.
Yeah, if we get to season 4, we somehow had survived season 3.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like, I really feel like, you know, a lot of shows from this era, like, there's not really, like, long-term character development because the intention was to have it so that you could go back into any given episode the same as you had before. Like, they always return to the status quo. But I think if you look at the show from the beginning of season 1 to the end of season 4, there actually have been changes to Napoleon and Ilya's characters, and they have kind of become more jaded and cynical by the end of it.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it also is reinforced by the fact that each season is very different from the previous ones. And so season 4 is like, it's almost a show on its own because it's so completely different from seasons 1 to 3, because it deals with different ideas, and it even has bad endings, which never happened in U.N.C.L.E. before.
Yeah, there's a couple of endings to some of the season 4 episodes that when I was watching them the first time through, like, I said to my husband that they were Miami Vice episode endings, because, like, every episode of Miami Vice ends like that. Like, the world is terrible and you'll never make a difference.
Oh my god.
But, you know, in a weird way, that kind of leads into the other topic that we said we wanted to discuss, which was the ways in which Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Star Trek either come together or diverge. Because I think that in particularly the first 2 seasons, there is a very heavy overlap in that kind of utopian ideal where, like, you can make a difference and your actions do matter. And participating in society is right. Whereas, like, later on, Man from U.N.C.L.E. seems to kind of stray a little bit away from that ideal.
Also, like, something interesting that I learned. Okay, I'm gonna bring up the link on my phone so I can look at it. So I went on the Man from U.N.C.L.E. episode guide website, and someone actually, like, the person who runs it does not like the girl from U.N.C.L.E. That's their opinion, but they talk about how, like, according to them, apparently Norman Felton and Arena Productions, the company that produced The Man from U.N.C.L.E., they really didn't actually believe in a woman being a secret agent. So they weren't really putting their full effort into the girl from U.N.C.L.E. Again, this is just from this website. I don't know. It doesn't say where it got that from, but I found that interesting because it does make sense considering that the women in Man from U.N.C.L.E. do seem to have some sort of, like, they have their own personalities and stuff, but at the end of the day, they do seem to be limited to more traditionally held roles by women, except for, like, yeah. So I do think that's rather unfortunate.
Well, I mean, that kind of as much as, we like to think that, like, Star Trek did a good job with things like that, thinking about, like, the pilot for Star Trek in which number one is a woman, and the network was like, that's ridiculous, you can't have the second in command be a woman. So,
yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, true, I think maybe I was having a too utopian view of Star Trek in myself, as in, like women are doing so much in it and everything, but really, and I think about so many episodes are just Kirk falling in love with random alien woman, and they kiss for one episode and then they leave.
But also, you have to remember that The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. came out the same year as season 3, and really, if you compare them, I wouldn't say that The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. is that much worse than season 3.
Yeah, the tone is similar, and I mean, it kind of makes sense that Girl from U.N.C.L.E. would be cancelled regardless, just because season 3 was what caused Man from U.N.C.L.E. to be cancelled as well. So,
yeah,
just a big old cancel party.
Oh.
When I was looking up, so I mean, let's go to one of the things that's like a very easy sort of concrete thing that's shared between the two series is actors. There are so many people who show up in Man from U.N.C.L.E. episodes who either later show up in Star Trek episodes or who are recurring characters on Star Trek. So, like, we have James Doohan in this one. There's an episode in season 1 with William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy. There's in the one that's not about Eva Perón, but it's about Eva Perón in season 4. Yeah. Oh god, what is it called?
Phoebe Angel.
Yes, yeah. In that one, the main woman is played by someone who was in like 4 or 5 Star Trek episodes as different characters. And there's really Ricardo Montalban is in 2 Man from U.N.C.L.E. episodes, and obviously he's Khan in Star Trek. So there's like a really heavy actor overlap, which is really interesting.
Yeah, also.
But there was also
the woman who played Angela Baca in the series Angel, she was also in season 1. She played Clara Valdar, I think her name was, and she was an ex-love of Napoleon Solo.
Oh yeah, is she the one that is in the episode where they have to get drunk to convince the locals that they can be trusted?
Yeah.
I'm clearly really good with episode titles. I describe them all as if they are... Yeah, titles, it's like when I give directions. I'm like, turn left at the tree. I don't know street names. Yeah, no, but there's a very, there's a big stable of actors that is shared between the two series, but one of the things that I was less aware of is that there was actually some shared writing staff as well, because apparently a lot of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. writers were kind of ascended sci-fi fans who had become writers at some point during their fanish career. So I'm talking at this point more like 1940s, 1950s sci-fi fandom, with magazines of sci-fi literature. But Harlan Ellison, Terry Carr, David McDaniels, they were all kind of ascended fans who then ended up working on Man from U.N.C.L.E. and also Star Trek. And
there's one more important name, and it's Peter Allen Fields. He wrote one of the best U.N.C.L.E. episodes, and he, I think, was a showrunner on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, I don't know if he was an ascended fan, though. I don't know if that's the same background he came from, or if he was someone who kind of came down the publishing pipe in more traditional ways.
I actually know his story. He just wasn't. He was a clerk or something like that, and his secretary was somebody who read what he would write in his spare time, and she said that he should send what he wrote to publishers, and that's how he got into writing. And also one more interesting fact is the woman who was his secretary, she actually played small parts in the Man from U.N.C.L.E. as one of the secretaries at the U.N.C.L.E.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Oh.
So it's quite a story. Yeah.
That's cool. There's a lot of it. I think one of the things is fandom was a much smaller pool back then. It's not like there was the whole internet for people to be congregating on. So I think there is a lot of overlap between these groups, both in terms of Star Trek groups, U.N.C.L.E. groups, but also in terms of writers versus fans versus actors. There's, I think, more movement between those circles in some ways than there is now. And one of the things that is also interesting is a lot of the paperback books that were written for Man from U.N.C.L.E. were also written by people who were originally either sci-fi fans or even just Man from U.N.C.L.E. fans who then were hired to write these paperback books. One of the Buck Colson, one of the people who wrote Man from U.N.C.L.E. paperbacks, his wife, Juanita Colson, was a contributor to the very first Star Trek zine and was the editor of the second Star Trek zine.
Oh, wow.
So there's some really, very small world stuff going on.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
That's really interesting.
And it was described, I saw it described somewhere that, Man from U.N.C.L.E. was the first television series to inspire a fandom-like reaction.
Yeah.
And they talked about some of the reasons why. And one of the things I thought was really interesting was that Man from U.N.C.L.E. actually didn't have great ratings, through most of its run. And so the people who were fans of it, would work really hard to kind of proselytize about, you should watch this!
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find the quote. Yeah. During the height of its popularity, over half the television sets that returned on Friday nights at 10 p.m. were tuned into The Man from U.N.C.L.E. TV Guide dubbed it the mystic cult of millions. In a memo to programming vice president Mort Werner, the NBC research department reported that viewers were watching U.N.C.L.E. not just because they dislike other programs that are on, but because they are fans, fanatics. They talk about the program with other fans and go beyond that. They proselytize. They want to convert non-viewers.
Oh, I've done that.
And I just find that really interesting because it's yep, that's pretty much the definition of fandom. And it's very much this was kind of the first TV show that did that, and I know that fandom history often says that Star Trek was the first series to do that, but a lot of stuff that became kind of hallmarks of like how fandom operates, like it's almost like Man from U.N.C.L.E. is where those things started to kind of come together and ferment, and then Star Trek is where they were like placed into more regular active practice.
Yeah.
It's almost like, like, it's like, as far as fandom is concerned, like, Sherlock Holmes did for literature fandom and what Man from U.N.C.L.E. did for TV fandom.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And also...
Because, like, Sherlock Holmes definitely had a big fandom, like, in Victorian times.
Yeah.
That's why Conan Doyle had to bring Sherlock back to life.
Yeah.
Yup, because the fans were so mad.
And also Star Trek had reruns throughout the 70s, and Man from U.N.C.L.E. didn't. That's why it was easier to keep the fandom alive, I would say.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to remember the exact... There was a specific organization that complained about Man from U.N.C.L.E. reruns in the mid-70s.
Something Christian?
And... Yeah, so there were reruns, because it was long enough to be syndicated. But the reruns were stopped due to complaints from either one or a couple, like, interest groups that said basically it was too violent, and that they didn't think it was appropriate to be on in syndication, basically, and the networks kind of just acquiesced and were like, yeah, that's fine, whatever, we won't show it again.
It was so
it wasn't really until the advent of, like, VHS that it started to kind of re-find a fandom.
Yeah, because there was like there's almost like a Man from U.N.C.L.E. fandom Dark Ages where it's been like this is like in the 80s before like home cassettes became like a common thing, but long enough after the reruns and then the original showing that people were getting really distant from who the characters of Napoleon and Ilya actually were, because they hadn't seen the show in so long, resulting in extremely out of character fan fiction that's still pretty infamous.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a lot of...
And then probably when they actually...
Yep.
When they actually saw, like, the show again, they probably were like, oh, crap.
oh boy, that's not how I remembered that. Well, that's, it's interesting. That is actually another thing that is a weird, like, potentially shared between Star Trek and Man from U.N.C.L.E. thing, is the idea of, like, kind of characters drifting from their original template. So, the idea that, like, Ilya is this cold ice prince, when in fact he's kind of a dork. And, like, the idea that, like, Captain Kirk is a womanizer who just casts women aside. And it's, like, actually, like, in episode 3, he literally, like, sits a teenager down and talks to him about consent. Like... So it's the idea of kind of like pop culture memory and how these characters, particularly in an era before being able to, rewatch things ad nauseum, or being able to GIF things, or being able to, share clips with your friends, like they drifted so much farther from their original molds than maybe they do now. I don't know. I don't know how the fandoms of now will look in 20 to 50 years.
Yeah, it's interesting, but also at the same time, right now, like 50-something years from the end of the show, I would say that canon is held pretty well. I mean, nobody likes out of character stuff and everything.
It's true. I think people care a lot more about people staying in character in fic than they perhaps did during a time period where you couldn't really fact check.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Now there's isn't there like that Man from U.N.C.L.E. Bible PDF that goes into extreme detail about everything? Like, I didn't even know that existed when I first wrote Man from U.N.C.L.E. fan fictions. I think I might have to look at it again. I might have to look at it now to see, like, where it is. Because it literally goes into detail, like, where is the headquarters likely located and on Manhattan Island? And you're like, this is really specific, but okay.
This was written by a Rush agent.
All intelligence.
That's interesting. I've seen of it, but I haven't actually read any of it. I have written many words of fanfiction without the aid of this Bible, so...
I have read it, but only like 5 years ago, so I also can't be trusted with details.
The reruns in your head cannot be trusted.
Or can they?
But something interesting about the reruns in my head is that I often think the episodes are, like, in my head, I think the episodes are way less slashy than they actually are, and then I actually watch the episode again, and then I'm like, oh, they really did go there!
100%.
They really went there!
It's like... Every single time I'm like, no, I saw this with shipping goggles on, and, like, it's just my fanish perspective, and I definitely imagined this to be slashier than it was, and then I go back and I'm like, oh, nope, there's really no heterosexual way to take that.
Yeah. I can't wait until we get to the Suburbia affair.
Oh my god!
Oh, that one is so delightful.
Pure fan service.
When I watched the show like too many times, I started just watching episodes, and I kept expecting them to kiss.
You have the opposite problem, where you've bought in too deeply, and now you expect them to go the distance. I feel like I've made this joke before, but that's the secret second half of season 4, is Napoleon and Ilya are like, you know what, let's just get jobs as librarians and kiss each other.
Or, oh my god, or like a really dumb fluffy fan fiction. Why don't they start a bakery together? And then they make they make souffles.
Souffle! And raisin rye bread. Well, that's deeply saccharine.
Yep.
But sometimes that's what you need.
Yeah. That's why all those coffee shop AU fics are so popular.
I feel like, as someone who's worked in retail, I've never understood that, because, like, if someone came into the store where I worked and was like, hey, baby, I would be like, I'm gonna punch you in the teeth.
I know, in real life you would hate it, but, like, it's all about the loving fantasy.
This is completely off topic, but many years ago when I was a teenager, I worked at GameStop, and there was a man who used to come in all the time and ask if I wanted a drink, and my manager had to kick him out like once a week.
Oh my god, that's really awful.
It was not a coffee shop AU, it was harassment.
Not fun. I actually came up with good, I would say, around the good canon about what they could do after they left U.N.C.L.E. because I feel like they both are very restless, and I think they could try doing charity, but actively, like going to the places where they were needed and trying to help people, because I tried to come up with normal jobs for them, but it's just so difficult. They would get
I think
bored,
they would both get tired. Yeah.
Yeah.
Napoleon and Ilya doing well, it's part of why the reunion movie doesn't really make sense for either of them.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't see those jobs working. Particularly Napoleon doing a desk job.
But also the reunion movie is really stupid because recently I found my old post about it, and it described the logic of U.N.C.L.E in this movie. So first they needed to find Napoleon, and they couldn't find him, and then they decided.
The world's greatest spy agency can't find the spy.
Oh.
Yeah, and then they decided that the only man who could find Napoleon would be Ilya. Okay? And they decided to find Ilya, and they couldn't find him.
Oh.
Even though he had a regular job, he wasn't at his
Isn't he
office.
a famous fashion designer in the movie?
Yeah, and they just caught him. And he didn't pick up the phone, and they were like, oof.
I actually haven't seen the movie.
Afterwards.
I haven't seen the movie, and honestly, Ilya being a fashion designer sounds like a really bad AU.
Yup.
I can see Napoleon as a fashion designer, but not Ilya.
Well, and afterwards, guess what? They actually find Napoleon, and they tell Napoleon, now you go find Ilya.
So,
Please do our jobs for us.
What even is this plot? It's so stupid.
I mean, I guess that does reinforce the idea that they actually are the best agents at U.N.C.L.E.
Yeah.
Even in retirement, they're still better than the combined might of the entire rest of the organization.
But actually, in the first script of this whole mess, Napoleon was supposed to be the fashion designer, and Ilya was supposed to be into the computers. But David McCallum said, isn't it too obvious? And they decided to mix up.
Isn't it too obvious?
That's not too obvious. That's in character.
Really funny. Well, maybe he was trying to fill the plot hole of why can't we find them? They just kept looking for Napoleon in the fashion world, and they were like, but we don't know where he is!
No, but if Napoleon was in fashion, even with Ilya, it seemed like a gay joke, right? But with Napoleon, it would be even worse.
Yep. No, because the worst part is there's two ways it can go with Napoleon, which is always true of Napoleon. Is that it could either have been a gay joke or it could have been and he touches the models, and I feel both of those are very uncomfortable. Just let Napoleon be bi. So I do think we're butting up against about an hour. So do we have any last do we have any last thoughts to wrap up the shark affair and or Shark
yes,
Trek?
I have something to say. In this episode, we have Robert Culp playing Captain Shark, and of course, as I said many times, he was considered to play Napoleon Solo in the early stages. So, what do you think about him being Napoleon Solo instead of Robert One?
Who was the actor you said?
Robert Culp. He played Captain Shark.
Oh, that would be. Well, all of those people who want to make Ilya 20, that they, I guess, would be getting the age gap that they're looking for if Captain Shark were Napoleon. But I really want, he's very he's very staid. Like, he's a serious dude.
Yeah.
I feel like that would work for season 1, but
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think like the contrast between like just the way that like not only just Ilya and Napoleon, but the natural ways of Robert Vaughn and David McCallum and how they interact with each other as Napoleon and Ilya.
Yeah.
They have such amazing chemistry in
Yeah.
that way that I think that'd be really hard to replicate, because
Oh,
there are some there are like a lot of shows where like the chemistry between like the main characters is what carries the show, and I think this is one of those
Yeah.
shows. And if they hadn't
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
much.
and if they hadn't had found people like two actors with that chemistry, then I think it might not have been as successful as it was.
Yeah,
I would agree with
I
that.
agree.
That is actually another thing that is a weird Star Trek Munkle shared thing, is also just the idea of, like, the breakout character and how the sort of fanish push to have a particular character focused on ended up kind of changing the tone of the series and making it better for it. Because for Man from U.N.C.L.E, you know, Ilya was not originally intended to be like a co-star in the same way that that Napoleon was, and similarly in Star Trek, like Spock kind of was the breakout character and became much more popular than they expected him to. And for both of those shows, I think a big part of their value comes from the chemistry between the two leads, and so
Absolutely.
it's interesting thinking, like, if Ilya or if Spock had not become popular with fans, how different the shows would have been.
Oh yeah, so that also that
Yeah.
also reminds me of how in both Man from U.N.C.L.E and Star Trek, they both are some of the earliest like TV shows that involved like because like there's like Kirk / Spock, and then there's Ilya / Napoleon, and there's just and those are some both like pretty early like gay ships. So like I think that's they're kind of similar in that way too, since they both had such a chemistry. Like, I don't mean like necessarily romantic chemistry, just they bonded so well together as human beings that they were both very easy to be shipped together. So
yeah,
absolutely. Also, last week we talked about how Jill Ireland was also in Star Trek.
Oh yeah.
Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I missed the end of that.
Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, mostly just when I think about Jill Ireland, I just think about the incredible weirdness of being on a TV show over 4 seasons with your wife and then your ex-wife. I don't know if I have a lot of thoughts about Jill Ireland in response to Star Trek. I'm trying to think, what was her role?
She was the only woman that spoke last.
Oh yeah, we talked about this. That, you know, that's one of those weird things that ends up being a shared trait between Ilya and Spock. Cold, logical, probably gay men who have only ever loved one woman, and that woman is Jill Ireland.
Wait, so is this Ilya Kuryakin / Jill Ireland?
Yes. The rarest of rare pairs.
Yep.
Not my OTP, but you know. More power to you. No power to you.
Okay, one more funny thing that I noticed in similarities between the Man from U.N.C.L.E and Star Trek are the yellow triangles that they have on
Yeah,
their
I see it.
clothes.
That is interesting. I wonder if there's a reason for that, or whether it's just like it's a design element that shows up reasonably well on, like, old 3-inch black and white tube TVs.
Yeah, it's interesting. And there's, of course, this story that Robert Vaughn worked on a show that was produced by Eugene Roddenberry, and that's how Norman Felton noticed him. There's a story in the book about the show that Norman Felton called actually Gene Roddenberry and talked to him about being unable to find a star for his new show, and apparently Gene Roddenberry recommended Robert Vaughn to him. So you might say that he influenced the Man from U.N.C.L.E. in quite a big way.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if Norman Felton called Gene Roddenberry every time one of the Star Trek actors was on his show and was like, "Hey, remember when you gave me that Vaughn character? Here, take this guy. He'd make a good engineer. He seems Scottish."
Hey, I'm filming an episode about some kind of like Soviet spy. What was it? Like Soviet spy provocation, and there's these two guys. One of them could play a ship captain.
I don't know, something about this guy's face just screams ship captain to me. Are we now writing Norman Felton Gene Roddenberry fanfic?
Ah!
Look, my
That's the
OCD
rarest of
is
rare pairs.
Yeah.
No, my actual only true pairing is Norman Felton / Ian Fleming. Okay.
Is this because of the walks they would take because of Ian Fleming's heart condition?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I actually I went on Archive of Our Own to see if there was any David McCallum / Robert Vaughn fanfiction, and there's only like 9 stories. There's not very much. Like, I was really shocked. I was like, there's gotta be more. Like, but there isn't, and I found that interesting.
Now, the question is, should we be proud of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. fandom for being slightly less creepy, or should we assume that this is all trapped in physical zines somewhere?
Yeah. But we have to assume that they bought the 6 after AO3 became a thing.
I mean, I know, so as like a Starsky and Hutch fan, I know that there was a decent amount of like real people fic done for David Soul and Paul Michael Glazer back in the day. So I don't know, I feel like there may have been some zines like that, although the idea of going to your local Kinko's and being like, "Hi, please print out my pornographic fan fiction about some actors." Just like that's I've got some real secondhand embarrassment right now thinking about that.
That's like even worse than with fictional characters, like going to your kink.
Way worse.
But there also were like File 40 sites that had specifically only Men from U.N.C.L.E. fanfiction. And there was also fanfiction.net, so who knows?
Yeah, there's so many like old Man from U.N.C.L.E. fanfiction sites that are like gone now that like you can only get access to like on like the
Wayback Machine.
Yeah, Wayback Machine. Yeah, like I've gone to Man from U.N.C.L.E. fan sites on the Wayback Machine before, and it's a fun time. But it's also kind of it's also interesting because when you click on a fanfic, there's no warnings, there's no ratings, you have no idea what you're getting into. It could be like a beautiful, sweet story that you absolutely love, or it could be like completely wrong in every way, and you have no way of knowing.
It's like the description description is like, Ilya and Napoleon share a beautiful Christmas together, and it's like, and one of them, literally nothing I could say right now would be appropriate for this podcast.
Okay. Let's say dice. I don't know.
All I know is that when I first got into this fandom, I read something about, like, some of the infamous zines that Logan brought up earlier, that there was a lot of use of guns in ways that one would not usually use guns, and also is not a gun safety, not a good gun safety choice. We broke Logan.
I can't believe this. Oh my god, this is so cursed.
I remember being like, do I want to get into this fandom? After I read that, being like, what kind of people are watching this show?
It seems like we've mostly gone past that now. This seems to be mostly like in the 80s and stuff, and I think we've moved on from there. Because there's also other old tropes back then that have pretty much been discredited now. Like, for example, like the Ilya Soviet defector trope. That's pretty much died out now, which I think is for the better, because it doesn't really suit his character.
Yeah. Yeah. That, and I think there was just a lot of, like, angsty fic in the, like, late 70s and early 80s in terms of zines. There was a lot of, like, non-con, and, like, the other thing that always bothers me in older fic is when all of the characters are heterosexual except for the one person that they are currently sleeping with.
I know! It's like the ultimate no homo.
It's like, even right now, as we are sleeping together, no homo. Yeah, and I feel like fandom as a whole has kind of matured past some of that. Not entirely, but I think, like, generally there's a lot less, like, it's not gay if it's you, and also non-consensual stuff is totally fine, and also, like, let's just all have angst forever.
Yeah. In addition, when talking about, like, the evolution of Man from U.N.C.L.E. fanfiction, I've noticed that there has been this, like, there's this constant, like, hypocritical view of Ilya, where he either is this cold ice prince, or he's this soft, effeminate, sleek twink, and I'm just like, because of the fact that Ilya is, like, blonde makes him effeminate, I guess, but then he's also an ice prince, and I'm like, bruh, like, he's way more nuanced than either of these.
Well, I mean, the kind of similar things have happened with, like, Spock, in terms of, like, he got a lot of portrayals as just, like, totally unfeeling, and that baffles me deeply, because, like, his whole character is about how he pretends that he's totally unfeeling, but it's very obvious on screen that he's not.
Yeah.
But I do feel like maybe it just comes from people who aren't really very good at, I don't want to say not good at writing, because that sounds mean, but
no, I feel like everyone's not good at writing at some point. Like, I wrote a novel when I was in 8th grade, and I don't want to look at it.
I feel like writing nuance is really hard, and I think that being able to recognize nuance in other people, be they fictional or real, is something that develops with age, and I think that for some people, they never quite get there, and it's like other people are always still kind of bit players, that the only person who has an inner complexity is themselves, and I feel like if you are someone who feels that way, it's going to be really hard to write characters with distinct inner lives.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also made me think about how lucky I am to be a fan in this time. Because now I can basically avoid reading anything I don't like. I actually don't read a lot of fic, and but imagine if I was a fan in the 80s, and
And all,
the only fan
oh god.
stuff that was available were zines, it would be something.
I mean, even as someone who grew up in the early days of, like, internet fandom, I distinctly remember, like, reading fic when I was, like, 11, being like, this sounds interesting, it's about Pokemon, and then being like, ah! When I realized what it was actually about, because no one used to tag anything. Like, the first NC-17 fanfic I ever read was Sonic the Hedgehog, and I did not know it was going to be NC-17, and I was deeply, deeply horrified.
Oh my god.
So, I mean, yeah, I agree. I think living in a time period where it's easier to cherry pick is definitely, it's good. It's nice being able to, hey, it's that old fanish adage, like the, don't like, don't read.
Yep.
But that's much easier now.
Yeah.
So it seems, are we about done now? It seems like, do we have much else to talk about?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think we're good.
So, alright, everyone go write whatever bizarre fanfiction that you have in your hearts, be it Norman Felton, Gene Roddenberry fic, or Ilya Kuryakin, Jill Ireland fic, and maybe don't send it to us.
Just put it on Archive of Our Own. I'll know it's you.
Yeah. We'll find it.
You can say some Norman Felton to me.
All right. Well, we are signing off.
Next week we are going to be discussing the Deadly Games affair, and we will be talking about Angelic and maybe some other female villains.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Signing off.
Yep.